Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Raja Aimana bin Raja Azhar. Today, I would love to present to you my Viva presentation about factor of student motivation and engagement in physical activity among STPM student at College Tingkatan 6 Seri Putra Ipoh. Okay, first of all, we go to the background of the study. According to Frederick 2016, state that student motivation is defined as a process where the learner's attention become focused on meeting their scholastic objective and their energies are directed towards realizing their academic potential. Furthermore, study by Texera 2012 show that lack of motivation can broadly be explained by two order of factor. First, as highlighted in the previous statistic, people may not be sufficiently interested in exercise or value its outcomes enough to make it a priority in their life. Many individuals experience competing demands on their time from educational, career, and family obligation, possibly at the expense of time and resources that could be invested in exercising regularly. This study reveals that the researcher facing the factor which can affect the lack of motivation in engaging physical activity among students. Secondly, by Texera 2012, some people may not feel sufficiently compete at physical activities, feeling either not physically fit enough or skilled enough to exercise, or they may have health limitation that present a barrier to activity, whether it be low interest or low perceived competence. The physical activity participation data indicates that many people are either unmotivated or amotivated, having no intention to be more physically active, or are insufficiently motivated in the face of other interests or demand of their time. Meanwhile, according to Chai Lian 2016, physical activity is a very important activity because it can make you feel motivated and one's health as well as the individual away from the dangerous disease such as heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and lack of motivation. Moreover, physical activity can bring benefit to the individual and to combat a variety of diseases and conditions that affect the physical and mental health. In Spss 2015 said that physical activity is a collection of complex activities which include bodily function or events involving skeleton motion, with the aim of spending the energy accumulated throughout the previous activity of the day. Next, we go through the statement of problem. Agreeing to Elliott 2015, cite that student motivation is essential in facilitating a desire to begin to engage in and pursue educational goals. As mentioned by Lauderdale 2015, some students exert a little effort in doing physical activities, while others avoid participation in physical activity altogether. As a result, student motivation may be a critical determinant of the success or failure of students to engage in physical activities. This research was to determine the factor of student motivation in the engagement of physical activities, mainly in Form 6 students. There was a study by Abdullah 2018 that the mental health such as cognitive function can be improved by lowering levels of anxiety and depression, whereas increased feelings into a more positive direction throughout physical activity and exercise. This proof shows physical activity can improve the performance of students in terms of physical, mental challenge, and their motivation to engage in activity at school. Based on these findings of past researchers, student motivation might affect engagement student in physical activity. As a result, this research is currently finding out the factor of student motivation and engagement in physical activity among STPM students at College Tingkatan 6 Seri Putra Ipoh. Okay, next we go to research objective. First research objective is to investigate the factor of student motivation and engagement in physical activity. Secondly, to determine the difference in student motivation and engagement in physical activity between gender among STPM students. The third research objective is to determine the difference of student motivation and engagement in physical activity between races. Okay, next we go to the literature review. The factor of motivation by Des and Ryan 2017 My first domain of the factor of motivation is intrinsic motivation, which refers to partaking in an activity because of interest and or enjoyment. Desi and Ryan 2017 also said that intrinsic motivation exists when individuals participate because of an essential enjoyment or interest in the activity. My second factor of motivation is extrinsic motivation, while Desi and Ryan 2017 also state that extrinsic motivation is generally defined as the participation in an activity because of a goal diverse from the activity itself. In contrast, involvement in an activity to obtain rewards is referred to as extrinsic motivation, being engaged in activities because of external or internal pressure is considered an extrinsic form of motivation. My last, which is the third factor of motivation, is amotivation. Amotivation is defined as the absence of extrinsic or extrinsic motivation, and as a result, the absence of self-determination in Ryan and Desi 2012. Furthermore, a motivated individual perceives no worthwhile reason for participation. A motivation exists when individuals lack a sense of intention to participate. The conceptual framework in understanding this domain, which is the factor of motivation, the study can conclude that students are motivated by either intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation factor. Intrinsic motivation means they are genuinely interested in the subject matter and feels it's relevant to their life. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is driven by external factors such as grades, parental expectation, or future earning potential. A motivation exists when individuals lack a sense of intention to participate and feel as thought they are going through the motion by Lemery 2016. All of the domain affect the engagement in physical activity on students. Okay, we go through to the methodology research design. The research design of this research is non-experimental quantitative research by Gray 2017. The sampling of this study, respondent from two classes which are lower and upper secondary, comprised of STPM student at College Tingkatan 6 Seri Putra Ipoh. Sijil Tinggi Pelajaran Malaysia, commonly shortened as STPM, is a Malaysian higher school certificate. Many educational institutes acknowledge STPM, and the results are considered equivalent to GCE advanced level result. STPM also recognized as Form 6. Sixth formers in national secondary school are commonly separate from other students in the lower form by wearing different school uniform, becoming delegated leadership status within school society, often with lax enforcement of specific school rules and regulation, and sometimes even needing a separate morning assembly and recess for sixth formers, along with co-curriculum activity. As been mentioned by Craigie and Morgan, 1970, they stated population of 210 ideal sample size will be 136 was sufficient to represent the population to generalize the result of the study. Number of respondents answered was 165 students. The sampling technique, Etiken 2016, said that convenient sampling, also known as haphazard sampling or accidental sampling. And now we go through the best part, instrumentation. First, on the section A, which is the demographic profile. In this segment, it focuses on the demographic profile of the respondent, which involve gender, class, and finally ethnicity of the student. The population profile consists of one object and close-ended question was used. The data collection is used by the researcher to assess the demographic profile of the student. For section B, this study used sport motivation scale questionnaire SMS 28. The research used the sport motivation scale by Pelletier 1995. It was utilized to capture data on the motivation of sport participation. The 28-item rating scale measured 3 dimensions of motivation, namely intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, and amotivation. scale value range from 1 does not correspond at all to 7 correspond exactly. The higher the mean score, the higher the level of motivation of the motivation type. The Cronbach alpha coefficient for the sub-dimension for the scale for intrinsic motivation was 0.86. For extrinsic motivation, it was 0.82, and A motivation recorded 0.75 and indicated acceptable internal consistency reliability. Okay, now we go to the data collection procedure. First thing first, we need to get the ethic approval from the university. Secondly, we seek permission to conduct the research from College Tingkatan 6 Sri Putra Ipoh. The third, we give information and briefing to the sample of the study and the questionnaire. The fourth is distribute the questionnaire to the sample. Next, the fifth procedure is run data analysis using Spss version 26. Last, we interpret the data. Data analysis. As we mentioned before, the objective of this study is to identify the factor of the student motivation and engagement in physical activity. Second objective, which is to determine the difference on student motivation and engagement in physical activity between gender. Last objective is to determine the difference of student motivation and engagement in physical activity between ethnicity. Next, the statistical analysis. First objective, we use a descriptive analysis, and then for the second objective, we use independent t-test, and the last one, the third objective, we use the one-way ANOVA. Okay, this is the result of the first objective, which is a factor of student motivation and engagement in physical activity among STPM students. As you can see, the left of the slide, which is item of student motivation and engagement in physical activity, the highest mean 6.65 and the standard deviation is 0.79. The lowest rank of the item of the student motivation in engagement in physical activity, which is at 2.58, and the standard deviation is 2. As you can see at the right of the slide, which is the domain of the student motivation, the first rank of the domain of the student motivation is intrinsic motivation, which is the mean 6.24 and the standard deviation is 0.81. The lowest domain of motivation, which is A motivation, at the mean of 3.05 and the standard deviation is 1.61. Okay, this is the result for second objective, which is a difference between gender in student motivation and engagement in physical activity. There was no significant difference of motivation in engaging physical activity between male and female. The result indicated scores of male mean of 5.33, standard deviation of 0.87, and for female the mean, which is 5.11 and the standard deviation is 0.79. T, which is DF 163 equals to 1.62, which is P is bigger than 0.05. As a result, the objective accept the null hypothesis. Okay, lastly, we go to the result for third objective, which is difference between ethnicity in student motivation and engagement in physical activity. There was no significant differences of motivation between three races in student motivation and engagement in physical activity among STPM students at College Tingkatan 6 Sri Putra Ipoh, which are Malays, Chinese, and Indian, at the P bigger than 0.05 level for three conditions. Frequency 1123 equals to 1.12, which is P equal to 0.32. Therefore, the third objective is failed to reject the null hypothesis to engage in physical activity. Previous research in Ryan and Desi 2017 mentioned that most of the students have intrinsically motivated behavior current when engaging in activity for themselves out of pure interest and enjoyment. Their research shows that students engaged in physical activities have intrinsically regulated behavior, which is a student who perform physical activities or tasks without any external rewards. This research also support the finding of the present research. Okay, on the other hand, according to Texera 2012, their research indicates that there are positive association of intrinsic motivation with physical engagement were reported in 22 or 23 independent samples on the percentage of 62% or 92% in multivariate or bivariate analysis respectively. Intrinsic motivation is shown to have a important factor for students for a longer physical participation and engagement, especially since these different forms of autonomous motivation share some common antecedents that will be applied in intervention setting. This study is consistent with the existing study on intrinsic motivation being more important rather than extrinsic and a motivation. However, this current study result is contradicting with Mishra and Acharya 2017, as they stated that extrinsic motivation has a bigger impact rather than intrinsic motivation. Their research shows that people participate in sport to prove them rather than for the love of the game, and therefore extrinsic motivation plays a greater part in sport involvement than extrinsic motivation. Finally, also reliable with the current research is from Dishman 2015. Their research shown that consistent with theory, which is the self-determination theory (SDT), hypothesized relationship among variables were supported. Integrated regulation and intrinsic motivation were most strongly correlated with moderate to vigorous physical activity and physical engagement measured by an accelerometer. This also support the recent research saying that intrinsic motivation is the leading factor in physical engagement among students. Second, for the discussion, there is no significant difference between gender in student motivation and engagement in physical activity among STPM students. P equal to 0.10, accept non-hypothesis because the school treated equal and both gender does not have any advantage on each other. Previous studies state that therefore this study is consistent with Mishra 2017, as in their research it shows that indicated that there is a little to no difference between man and woman and their perceived motivation when they engage in sport. Also reliable with the current research is Abdullah 2021. T-test research reported no major differences in the gender effect on student physical activity engagement. These studies indicate that gender has no bearing on the effect for student engagement. Female students, on the other hand, had a higher mean engagement rate than male students are unpredictable. Furthermore, study by Condrick 2013 is inconsistent with the recent study, as in their research there is a difference between male and female. Their research affirmed that as one might anticipate, sport may mean more to males as a method of gaining social acceptance and friendship, whereas sport may mean more to women as a mean of relaxing, which is in line with conventional male and female stereotype and roles. This research voiced out that male tend to have more extrinsic motivation rather than female, while female are more prone to be motivated by intrinsic motivation. Viverse, Agley 2011 obtained that male students are more motivated by intrinsic motivation, or in other words by a need of power, competition and challenge, while female students are in majority driven by extrinsic motivated, such as body weight control and appearance, which also is inconsistent with the current study. And now we go to the last research objective, which is the research objective for the discussion. There is no significant difference between ethnicity on the student motivation and engagement in physical activity among STPM students. P-value is more than 0.05, which is P equals to 0.32, which result in accepting the null hypothesis. The previous research Khan to 2015 specified that a study done on students in the United States report that physical activity level have varied by races or ethnicity, as Black and Hispanic adolescents report less physical activity on average than do white adolescents and are more likely to report no physical activity on any day in the past week by. These are the three races that are found in another country, but in the same context to the current research. The research was not consistent with the current research as they have significant difference in ethnicity that affect motivation and physical engagement. On the other hand, Chai Lian 2016 show a study that is also inconsistent, as Chinese participants were the least physically active ethnic group, as well as the least likely to report moderate or vigorous activity. This relationship held true even when controlling for all other variables, suggesting perhaps that some normative aspect in Malaysian Chinese culture discourage exercise. Indians were most likely to engage in light exercise such as gardening, housework, leisurely walking, bowling, fishing, or carpentry. In keeping with previous finding by Bauman 2002, others races, example not Indian, Chinese, or Malay, were more likely to engage in vigorous activities such as running, heavy yard work, weight training, and sport. Even though this is a general statement on races in Malaysia and not specifically on students, it shows that races and ethnicity have a significant difference on physical activity, which is inconsistent with the current research. So now we come to the conclusion part. In a nutshell, the researcher found out that majority respondents are most influenced by intrinsic motivation by engaging in an activity for the pleasure and satisfaction of performing it. Intrinsically motivated individuals voluntarily participate in an activity without experiencing external or internal pressure to do so, and without expecting rewards. Therefore, the student can achieve good results in doing physical activity, thus being successful in future. The researcher also conclude that there is a moderate positive factor between motivation and physical activity. It's meaning that better the motivation of the student means better they are engaging in physical activity. In additional, student motivation is the same for both gender. No discrimination happen to either of the opposite gender as they go through the same syllabus and experience in this selected school, which is College Tingkatan 6 Seri Putra Ipoh. Finally, the school also does not play any roles in the difference of motivation affects the student, as all student background and culture are still the same even in different classes. As a result, it is hoped that this current study can be beneficial to not just students but also researchers in the future. Okay, last but not least, it is the recommendation for future research. Further study on factor of motivation and physical engagement in the future, because by studying the research it more, we can further determine whether a student motivation can be influenced by not just through intrinsic, extrinsic, and a motivation, but more other factors that can be further help to improve their motivation towards physical engagement. As the result, it may help the relevant student to become more motivated toward physical engagement in the future. Recommend for future study to identify factor of motivation on physical engagement to be using a physical questionnaire instead of online survey. This may provide even more accurate result, as when using online, students may answer the question lightly and not focus, resulting in reduced accuracy of the answer. Researcher recommends future researcher to furthermore test the hypothesis and increase more respondents of the current research, as it can give more support to the result of the current study topic and field. Okay, this is the reference for this study. I think that's all from me. Thank you for lending your time listen to my Viva presentation. I hope you guys doing well and take care. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.